And so that brings us to our featured presentation for this evening. We have a couple of great presenters who are going to be speaking on electric vehicle charging programs in the county. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Susan Freedman and Kathy Keehan.
We're very happy to be here tonight. Again, I'm Susan Freedman, and we're here to talk about a regional EV charger rebate program that is in development right now, and we expect to have open in July of 2020. And it's to offset the install and purchase costs of level 2 workplace and public chargers. So not home chargers, but where we need chargers out and about and at workplaces. And if we're lucky, we'll also get some state funding, which will bring resources for DC fast charger incentives as well. And we're pretty confident we're going to get that. So a little bit about SANDAG real quick. We're the local council of governments and the Metropolitan Planning Association for the San Diego region. A big thing we do is a regional transportation plan about every 4 years, and there's one happening right now. And it plans for the long range out to 2050 for buses, trains, roads, bikes, pedestrians, a little bit of everything. And there's a heavy focus on electrification across all sectors this time. So you can talk to one of us afterwards, but if you like to get involved, it's an opportunity really at the front end of this planning effort to have an impact.
Okay, and I'm Kathy Keehan. I'm with the Air Pollution Control District. We're an agency, the County of San Diego, and we focus on making sure your air is clean and safe to breathe. And so we have a variety of programs. I work in our incentive and planning group, and so what we do is we actually give people money, typically to get rid of their old dirty diesel equipment and buy new cleaner equipment, but we're branching out. And so we're also going to do a program to incentivize EV charging infrastructure. This is really important. We have a huge challenge in our region, and that you guys, everyone's buying electric cars. That's great. We need to get more of them, but our infrastructure is not keeping up with the number of cars that are out in the public. And so we have a deficit, a gap of we're going to say thousands of public chargers. And so we'll talk a little bit about that tonight.
Awesome. So right here is just a snapshot. I think this room might know all of this information, so we can go through it kind of quickly. But basically, growth in the EV purchases in the EV market in San Diego County, it's growing year over year. What we see is it's usually about 60% are battery electric vehicles, 100% electric, about 40% are plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. It's running on the mix of electric and then switching over to gas. At the end of 2018, we had about 35,000 vehicles in the region. But when we look at targets for the state's fair share, our fair share of the state's goals in 2025, we're expecting 110,000 zero-emission vehicles, which are primarily electric. But once we get some hydrogen fueling stations down here, or more than one, we'll start seeing fuel cell vehicles as well. In 2030, targets over 400,000 electric vehicles. So that's what our charging program is planning for in the next several years. This one, again, I think this group pretty much knows. We're talking about level 2 chargers and DC fast chargers. Focus is really workplace and other public areas where you're going to be parked for several hours for the level 2s. And we're hopeful for the DC fast to be funded. This would be not the Tesla chargers, but the non-proprietary chargers through public funding. To have that happen as well through state assistance. In terms of where we're at and what we need, this is level 2 chargers and just capturing the last 5 years of infrastructure that's out there. We have about 1,600 ports right now in San Diego County. And ports, that could be if you have a dual charger, that means there's 2 hoses, 2 connectors on that, so that counts as 2 ports. What we have here, so at the 2018 number of about 1,600, we need on average about 9,500 by 2025. And we're getting this data from the California Energy Commission that worked on a study with the National Renewable Energy Lab, or NREL. And they did a county by county study of infrastructure needs for electric vehicles, looking at the target year of 2025. And so this is specific to our county. Ways that we're getting these chargers in the ground, initially it was the EV project, and then more recently, SDG&E through their Power Your Drive program has put in several thousand chargers, and we're going to see that jump for some of that in 2019. In terms of next year, SANDAG, APCD, and hopefully with the California Energy Commission support, we'll have millions of dollars to go toward infrastructure investments as well. In terms of fast chargers, it's more dramatic. We have, give or take, about 150 fast charging ports right now in San Diego County. The low end that the Energy Commission sees that we need in 2025 is 900, but the high end is 3,000 chargers. And that really depends on how much our ride sharing services take off and the switch or shift to more battery electric vehicles over plug-in hybrid vehicles. And that's why the range is so high on that one. The EV project initially, but then Electrify America is helping get infrastructure in the ground. This is the Volkswagen settlement subsidiary, putting about $800 million, or not about, $800 million worth of infrastructure in the ground in California over 10 years. And before that, EVgo, this was one out of an NRG settlement, but they put in $200 million worth of fast charging infrastructure through California. And that's what got us the numbers, most of the numbers so far. With our program, we're anticipating the Energy Commission is going to step in and provide some funding for us to have incentives for the DC fast chargers.
Oh, right. Yeah, can you click for me? I like that she thinks I know what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is, the SANDAG does actually have a mapping tool that shows where the EV charging stations are in the county. You can actually go to that website on the screen there and pull up, and so you could zoom in and you can see specifically where those things are. It also, it's based on EV registrations, on SANDAG's regional travel model. We're trying to figure out where there are gaps in the network, and that's where we're hoping to have your help a little later today. We've got a map printout out here, and at the end of the meeting, not after our presentation, but as you're leaving, we'd like to get your input on where do these new chargers need to go? Where are we missing? Where are the gaps in the system? So this tool is available, but also we're hoping to tap the information in your brains tonight to get that information for us.
Right. Real quick, the reason SANDAG is putting money into this, our board has committed $30 million for public and workplace infrastructure from 2020 to 2050. So about $1 million a year. We're going to front load that sum. It's out of our last regional transportation plan, and it's a way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from passenger vehicles on the road here. So do that, improve air quality. It's in both an action in our strategy as well as in our EIR, which means that we've got the wherewithal and the commitment from our board to really push the envelope on this. We're also looking at how to further EV investment going forward in our next plan that'll be adopted in 2021. So we're expecting to have even greater incentives for different types of EV charging, as well as potentially a vehicle incentive program. The work Kathy and I have been doing over the past year, we really kicked off last May. It's all from Caltrans, the Department of Transportation here, we were awarded a planning grant. So we looked at what's happening across the country, found some best practices over the first phase. We've been in a program design phase right now and have a framework built out that we want to get feedback on. And then after we get these levels of feedback and working with the state, we're going to finish building out the program to launch next year.
At the same time that SANDAG was working on their EV infrastructure incentive program, the county, through the Air Pollution Control District, is also thinking about an EV infrastructure incentive. So through our work with the Climate Action Plan for the County of San Diego, the Air District committed to establishing an incentive program. We have a target of 2,040 level 2 chargers in the unincorporated area by 2030. We're not going to pay for all of those. That's our big target. We are, though, the Air Pollution Control District is a regional agency just like SANDAG, and so we cover the whole county. So our program will support chargers not just in the unincorporated areas, but throughout the county as well. We're doing that because at the Air District, like I mentioned, we're concerned about mostly criteria pollutants, ozone, particulate matter, a large portion of those pollutants in San Diego County are from cars and trucks, mobile sources. And so we really see EVs as an opportunity to help us with our air quality issues, along with our greenhouse gas emission reductions. The Air District has pledged $500,000 a year for this program. It goes through 2030 or until we hit our target. We're hoping sooner. And in the Climate Action Plan, it specifically calls out creating partnerships with other organizations. We knew that the county couldn't do it all by ourselves. We knew that there are other folks who thought that this was an important effort, and so we wanted to make sure that there were partnership opportunities. And I want to thank Susan for seeing that and taking that opportunity and making sure that we could work together, because I think we're going to have a really great program, much stronger together than we would if we were doing separate programs.
Oh. We're trying to mix it up and split it so it's not one person talking all the time, but we're still working out the kinks, so bear with us. And then this is the third opportunity. We're hoping to partner with the state of California through the California Energy Commission, and they have a program called CalEVIP, which will fund both level 2 incentives as well as DC fast charger incentives. And they are rolling this program out on a region by region basis. It just launched like late 2017 in Fresno and then to SoCal. Their most recent one of a major metro area was Sacramento in April. And we are looking at Sacramento as really a model for how we would have a partnership with them for the San Diego region, because we have a lot of similarities there. And I'll say the Center for Sustainable Energy, who's hosting us here, they were the competitively selected statewide administrator for this program for the Energy Commission. So it's really, we are in a lot of talks with CSE and the Energy Commission and APCD and SANDAG. And if you know anything about government agencies, it's really hard to get us all to work together on the same page. So a big chunk of our time is this heavy lifting to form some solid partnerships and really bring out to the public one cohesive, one-stop shop program, one application, regardless of where the funding comes from, that's available to everyone. And that's also a lesson learned from Fresno. They have some separate programs, and it's created a lot of confusion for the public, and we want to avoid that as much as possible. So is this still me? Yes. So basically, we're going to go into several slides now that we're really looking for your input on. It's our draft framework for a lot of the program design criteria. Some of it comes straight from the state that really we can't alter too much, but there's a lot of areas that they are seeking regional input on. And we've had a project team working on this, and now we're getting it out to different stakeholder groups to get more input. So whether it's the program budget, program type, eligible technologies, different types of sites, the treatment of low-income and disadvantaged communities, different types of metrics and tracking, as well as education, outreach, and some workforce development that we want to do.
So, but we are using Sacramento as a model. And so for their program, they've got $14 million in their project. They've separated that out into a level 2 charging program and a DC fast charging program. They have a requirement that 25% of the total funds be spent in disadvantaged communities, which they defined. There's a very complicated way to define that. If you guys are interested, we could talk about that. They're running it as a first come, first serve program. So you get that application in and you're more likely to get funded. They have an online application. They have resource pages. They have a lot of information available through that program hosted by CSE, which we're thrilled that you guys are doing that project. And if any of you are interested in what that program looks like, you actually go to calevip.org and it'll tell you, you can pretend to apply for a voucher to install some infrastructure.
I've done a fake project.
What? I'm shocked by that. So for the DC fast charging program for Sacramento, the DC fast charging are really expensive to install, and so they've settled on a $70,000 per charger rebate, or 75% of the project cost, whichever is less. It could be more to install those chargers, but the incentive will be $70,000 on those, unless you live in a disadvantaged community, unless that charger is going in a disadvantaged community, in which case there's a little bump up there and you can get up to $80,000 to install a DC fast charger there, or 80% of the total project cost. There's also the opportunity, what they do in Sacramento is they have an opportunity replacement or make-ready kind of project. We know that there's a lot of chargers, level 2 chargers, that have gone in that need some help, that don't work as well or at all. And so we wanted to make sure that we're not only installing new infrastructure, but making sure that the infrastructure that's out there still works for people. We want people to be able to rely on that charging system. So you could potentially get an incentive to make sure that those chargers still work. Our recommendation for our program is that we would be consistent with those same requirements that are happening for the Sacramento program. For the level 2, this would be in Sacramento, they're doing a $5,000 per charge port incentive program. You get an additional $1,000 if it's a multi-unit dwelling, so an apartment complex or something, so long as they're publicly accessible. And then an additional $500 if you're installing that in a disadvantaged community. We're thinking that we might want the incentives to be a little higher at the base end, $6,000 per port for those level 2 chargers, an additional $500 to $1,000 if you're a multi-unit dwelling. We find that it's difficult to get charging in to those apartment buildings. It's easier. Folks are more motivated in single-family homes. Then it's just a more complicated process for multi-unit dwelling. So we're going to give a little bump up for that, and then an additional incentive for being in what we're going to call communities of concern. And so for our region, yeah, go ahead and bump to the map. Oh, I don't know if I can I see that? It's hard to see on this. There are disadvantaged communities that are designated by the state. That's kind of in that red crosshatch. There aren't very many of them in San Diego County. There's some, it's mostly along the portside communities, along the border, and then there's a little couple of census tracts in El Cajon. But we want to expand that to also include low-income communities as designated by the state as well, and those are the areas in blue along there. So that expands our options for being able to provide incentives for disadvantaged communities, folks who may not have access to charging infrastructure, but we know are going to be interested in electric vehicles. And we also know that this, interestingly, it overlaps really well with where we think the gaps are in the system, that it's been hard to install infrastructure in communities that don't have the resources. And so we want to motivate folks to do that. So go to the next one. Is this one me? I'll say yes. Okay, so we also have, in Sacramento, they have a limit on how much any one agency or one organization can access incentive funding. We don't want one city or company or group to access all of the money. We want to make sure it gets spread out throughout the county. So Sacramento limits it to $640,000 per applicant, which sounds like a lot until you start thinking about those DC fast chargers are pretty expensive. So it also provides for, this is active applications. So if someone is really efficient and getting a lot of stuff out there and completing projects, they can come back in and apply so long as there's funds still available. We would incentivize up to 10 level 2 DC chargers per application, because we want to hit that I don't know how familiar you are with Power Your Drive, but that was 10 or more chargers in any one location. So we want to make sure that smaller locations have an opportunity, and then up to 4 DC fast chargers, or a combination of level 2 and fast charging. For the Sacramento program, they allow private companies. There's a list of what that means there. Oh my goodness. You guys could read this. I'm not going to read all of those locations to you. But basically, we want the charging infrastructure to be available to people 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You shouldn't have to get behind a gate or know the secret password or any of that. We want it to be accessible. So we encourage people to buy EVs and feel assured that they're going to be able to access charging when they need it. We're not going to include single-family residences and assigned parking at those multis. If that parking spot is yours and only yours, that charging infrastructure would not qualify for this program.
I don't know. Alrighty, so another aspect of this, which is not necessarily in what the state's doing right now, but we recognize here a lot of need in the education, outreach, and workforce development area. So some things that we're planning to do, like we are tonight while we're in the early design phase, or not early, mid-design phase, I'll say, but before we are launching a program, is come out to different stakeholder groups, whether that's our elected officials, staffs, chambers of commerce, universities, organizations like the EVA. We want to get out and really get some feedback that we can then bring forward in finalizing the program. A particular type of education that we're planning to do before the program launches is go out to all the permitting officials in the local governments, which are SANDAG's member agencies, in which the APCD works really closely with as well. And that's so that they know that there should be, expect a lot of charger applications to be coming in soon for, these are public and workplace and fast charger. And there's been some different streamlining and best practice materials developed, whether it's here between SANDAG and CSE put some things together, as well as the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development is just recently, they're gonna come out any day now, any week now with a statewide guide to help move the process along, because right now infrastructure, EV permitting or EV charger permitting in California takes longer than it does in any other state. And that's kind of true with all types of permitting in California, but we'd still like to move it along a lot faster. And in terms of workforce development, we want to make sure that, I mean, anyway, you need to be a state licensed electrician to be able to do the installations. But there's also a continuing education program called EVITP, or Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Training Program, that contractors can take part in. And the trainings are not offered that often here in San Diego or in the state. So we want to try and provide funding to be able to bring a trainer in and build up that workforce. Right now, there's 8 electrical contractors in San Diego County with this certification. So we'd like to list it as a best practice, build up the workforce, and maybe at some future time that's a requirement. But it's, again, making sure that projects going in are done safely by people who are very familiar with EV chargers. And we've been working with the SDG&E, the IBEW, some social equity groups, and are going to be reaching out to some community colleges as well for that. And then just, this is a snapshot of what our region's budget and program are going to look like. So with SANDAG, we're looking at, I wrote an average of $1 million a year, but we're going to put in $1.5 million for level 2 incentives for at least the first few years. We expect for that incentive number to increase the overall budget once our next plan's adopted in 2021. Our focus, again, the level 2s, APCD is committing $500,000 about each year up through 2030. So between us, about $2 million a year for the level 2 chargers, and those rebates maybe at $6,000. And then if we get the statewide partnership, the Energy Commission has talked about a wide range, anywhere from $10 million to $23 million, which would go to a mix of fast charging incentives as well as level 2 incentives. So that would be a one-time allocation at the start of the program next year. And then when that money's gone, it's gone. But it really injects a lot of money and activity into a region. So we've gotten a lot of positive feedback that that's likely going to happen. I'll say with these next steps, and we'll let Tyson know about this, but if the Energy Commission does select San Diego as a Cali VIP region, there will be a public workshop on August 27th here in San Diego at SANDAG with the Energy Commission to talk about this joint program, what the budget is, and all the numbers. So about a month and a half from now, and that's if we get selected. There's also Electrify America is going to be in town in a couple weeks to talk about their investment, and they're really going to be focusing on talking to our local governments about permit streamlining and permitting best practices. So I can't wait to see how that goes, but it should be pretty good. And let me know if you have questions on either of those. We're going to keep seeking additional co-funding opportunities. SDG&E is always coming out with programs. We're talking to them about if there's some make-ready they could do to complement ours. And then we need to formalize these activities that we're doing, SANDAG and APCD together, as well as with the Energy Commission and CSE, which all would have to happen in the next 5 months. So it's a lot of fun for this to, to open up. But yeah, I think that's the last of it, but I'm gonna give this back to Kathy for any closing remarks.
How did this happen? It's not how we practiced. Yes, we're very excited about this program. We think it's, and we hope that that this is really going to make a difference for folks in San Diego, in the San Diego region. We really want to encourage people to convert to electric vehicles, and we think that providing the infrastructure they need to be secure, that there's going to be charging available for them, is an important part of that. So we're excited to move forward on the program, and I think now we'll take any questions that you might have. I think you had your hand up in the back there early on.
When we're dealing with 3 different programs, and yes, I think Electrify America is getting ready for cycle 2 this month, next month. But for the other programs, what's the other one? Just the SANDAG and the Air Pollution Control District. Yeah. There's a separate program. When does that one start?
We're planning to start in the middle of next year, July of 2020. Are there other questions?
I was wondering about your judging criteria of one project relative to another relative to another. I mean, you're doing a little bit of a geographic input from us on that chart, but yes, the only thing I heard so far was just get the right set of blocks checked, and if you're the next in line, then you qualify. Are you going to do a geographic spread or a any kind of category spread of this assistance?
I think we're looking at, we're going to let it be first come, first serve for the first year and take a look and see how we're doing, evaluate that project. But we didn't want to, one of the things that we learned from some of the other programs is to put as few restrictions on the program as we could, because we don't want to slow it down administratively. So I think we're going to try and be a little loose with it, at least for the first year or two, and then see where we are and see if there are things that we need to integrate into the program to make sure that we've got geographic distribution, economic distribution, those kinds of things. Unless you have a better suggestion, I mean.
No, well, at least you're throttling the funding year to year to year, such that you're not going to get, just the fast entrance grabbing all of the funding.
Right, and we're really doing a lot of, part of this outreach is to make sure that as much as we can get the word out, so it's not a very small group of people who know about the program. When we launch, we want everybody in the county to know so that everybody's got a shot at it. What do we think? We'll hit on this side and then we'll hit the middle. Yes, sir.
All right, so hypothetical, I'm a business owner of a health food store, and I think if I put a bunch of chargers out there and get more people to drive out the cars coming into my store, does this program, can someone who wants to put in 2 or 4 charging ports, is that something that will be available to that type of small business owner? Do you ever have more ambitious goals?
No, that's exactly the kind of person or business that we're aiming for. I mean, SDG&E kind of did those larger employers. We're aiming for some of the smaller businesses that were kind of left out of that program.
Yeah, are these all going to be grid tied, or is there any thoughts about requiring a certain amount of it to be solar powered?
That's a good question.
Well, yeah. Well, right now, we have been looking into it, but right now we don't have we're going to track if things are solar tied, but we are looking for these to right now be on the grid and be smart chargers so that they can communicate and people can adjust costs and things based on the time of day and when there is grid capacity. In the future, when we're reevaluating this, several people have brought up, battery storage or solar and being able to add those things on. And so the Bay Area is able to give an added incentive for that. We don't have that right now, but it's definitely something we're looking at and going to track. Okay, right behind.
I noticed part of the Volkswagen settlement, they put a bunch of chargers in near my house, and they all had the CCS plugs, which I don't know anybody's got a car that.
I do.
Oh, okay. How do you decide?
All European cars.
Okay.
All of our chargers, if we have a fast charger incentive, they must be the CHAdeMO and CCS combo. And that's the same way the state requires, and that's the same thing with anything the utility puts in terms of fast charging. They all must be both CCS, which is most European cars, as well as CHAdeMO, which is the Nissan Leaf, and maybe a couple other ones.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was noticing they didn't have any of the ones that'll plug into the Leaf, but.
The Leaf would be, oh, well, no, the Electrify America should have, I mean, they've told us that all of them are going to be bolts. So that would be the Chadmo one should be one of those two hoses. But yeah, I mean, I can't speak for them, so we can look that up.
Walmart and Howard.
Talk a little bit more about charging in disadvantaged communities. You may be more plugged into this. I saw LA Department of Water and Power, they've been putting level 2 chargers on power poles as a good way to build out infrastructure in disadvantaged areas where people street park and may not have parking. Is that something, have you heard about how that's going? Is that something that may be coming to San Diego?
I've heard some stuff on the demonstration. There's a company that's working on some of it, and it's with when the street lights were converted over to induction charging. There's a lot of extra electrical capacity on all the street lights. So there's an opportunity, if it works, to put in level 2 charging there, and if you can get the codes so that you can put chargers on the street. So I know San Diego, we can follow up with City of San Diego. I know they were looking into different ways to do on-street parking or charging. That hasn't happened, but there's some tests going on in LA and in New York that we are monitoring. I don't think we'd rule it out of our program once it's all legal, like it should qualify as a level 2 charger. I think we still have some hurdles here locally. Okay.
Is there a way for the property owner or person that installs it to recoup their investment by charging more for the electricity? How is the electricity made?
That'll be up to the host. So whether it's you have an agreement with a charging company or a service provider, or you're doing it yourself as a business owner. Some places aren't charging any fees for people to use the chargers because they want that business or it's part of their sustainability model. Others are, but that'll be, up to each individual to make that decision.
There's no restriction at this point.
Yeah, we don't have a restriction. We would encourage people to not, charge ridiculous amounts of fees, but we don't expect people would use those chargers then, and that would come down if there's some higher fee. Yeah.
On slide 33, you said that fleets are included, but they must be shared use. Can you speak to how fleets fit into the program or explain what there?
Yeah, and I'll say I personally am not sure on the fleet one, but they are doing it in Sacramento, and it's the way the state program's going. But the idea is that since this is for 10 chargers or under, it's not for any major fleet to be taking up my fear was they could take up all the rebates. And then they must be shared use. So it's gotta be where there's turnover on those chargers so that we get a high utilization. And we do want early adopters of fleets to be using chargers or using EVs. So I think it's something we're gonna agree, but we're gonna be watching it closely to see how it works in the first year or years and seeing if we adjust that. I mean, I'll say Kathy even talked about having a lower incentive for fleets, and so it's even something we're talking about.
Higher turnover of other fleet vehicles or public access charging?
Both.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty undefined at the moment, but we didn't want to leave fleets out because we do know that
A lot of businesses have cars that they use for business, and that's a perfectly valid reason to be using EVs, and we want to support that as well. So we don't want to leave them out, but we will be watching to make sure that it works. Yeah, maybe just time for a couple more, and then we'll be out. All right. Yes, sir.
Air pollution.
Yeah.
Last year, the year before, we were ranked number 6 in the country. How is that progressing? Is it very fast, or what's going on?
That's a good question. It's progressing, but not as fast as we'd like it to be. It's a difficult problem in San Diego. We're not as bad as some places in California, but our weather and the amount of emissions, particularly from the transportation sector, make it difficult for us. So we rely on the federal government and the state of California to pull the levers on mobile sources. We can't regulate who drives what in San Diego County. We're not allowed to do that. We can provide incentive programs, and so that's where my group comes in to work on those sorts of projects. So we have the carrot, the state has the stick. for mobile source incentives there. And that's how we're tackling it. But you're right, it's quite a challenge for us in San Diego County, and we have a lot of work to do. Just one or two more, maybe. Yes, sir, in the back.
I live in a condo. So I gather, say, condos, in this case, all of the residents' parking is assigned, therefore they wouldn't fit in. But we do have some guest spaces, and I know at one point the board was talking about putting in a charger in one of the guest spaces. So if the board was interested in doing that, how would
they would apply for this program and be able to do that. So long as it's not a gated community where, you know, if it's public,
not the guests.
The guest parking is available to anyone at any time, then yeah, that's the kind of project that we would be looking for.
Okay.
Last one in the back there, and then we'll.
So I'll be the Debbie Downer in the room.
Oh man, no. Well, okay, we're gonna do two more questions then.
Anybody who's driven an electric car knows the real problem with public chargers is they're used for parking spaces by non-electric cars, and sometimes by even electric cars. They're not plugged in. They're just convenient spots. So, is there any idea in your policy planning to come up with ways to prevent these from turning into just another parking place? I'll tell you, go to the beach down here, you will not find an electric car charging in any of those stations.
Well, that's definitely a challenge, I think.
And you ask the police, oh no, they're not working right, or do that. The police don't want this. This is a headache they don't want. So I can tell you that from personal.
I think there's two prongs to that, and both of them are kind of more of a social change than a police action. That as we have more people who own electric vehicles and who start to encounter those problems, we have a little more of a culture of, oh, I'm not going to park there because I know that I would be really irritated if I needed that and someone was parked there and not using it. So I think that that's one way to do it. That and the fact that if we could get enough charging infrastructure out there, it becomes less of a problem that there will hopefully, if that charging unit is being used. I mean, I hope our problem is going to be that there's so many electric vehicles that everybody's plugged in all the time. And that if we provide enough infrastructure, that people will be able to find another if one is occupied. I know it's a difficult challenge, and I don't think we've cracked that nut. Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, but it's worth tackling for sure. So anyway, I think I know that you guys want to go home at some point. We do have, I just want to put in a plug for, I know you have a couple more things on your agenda, but once the meeting breaks up, we really do want to get your input on where you think we're lacking in charging infrastructure. I have a little dot exercise here. And so on your way out, I hope you'll stop and give us some information about where we should be targeting. So thank you very much for giving us the time tonight. Give this back to you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Susan, for that great presentation on EV charging in the county. Looking forward to those programs launching.